Okay. Hi, everyone. Uh, well, thank you for having me here. Uh,
How's it?
I remember
Hey, Jack.
extraordinaire.
Yes.
no.
We're very happy you're here. Okay.
So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about some of the work what we've been doing on lab for the last few years, so specifically, one of the themes I'm going to present about today is how we're thinking about shape morphing systems and specifically using origami kind of technologies or origami-inspired fabrication processes to build them. The broad focus of my lab is to ultimately build high-performance, agile, and adaptable bio-inspired insect-scale robots that can one day successfully leave lab environments and operate effectively in the natural world. So that's the broad mission of like what we're trying to do. And hopefully, as we go through this talk, I'm going to disentangle a couple of these things in terms of the different aspects of like why we do these things. So the first thing I want to focus on is why insect scale robots. And so the motivation for us is basically insect scale robots are small. We're trying to get them to be the size of insects. And because of their small size, they provide unprecedented access to environments which other larger systems simply cannot. And so in my lab, so that's a niche which we're trying to explore. One specific example where some of these small-scale robots might be helpful is, for example, if you have to inspect the inside of complex parts like engines. So this is like a promotional video from a few years ago where we worked with Rolls-Royce to actually try to think about building some of these robots to be able to inspect the inside of jet engines. So it turns out that currently the state of the art is there's a human who goes around with the boroscope to record basically a bunch of images. And we need to do this like every time a plane lands or like every few, I don't know, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. And it's a time-consuming process. They need to take images, they upload it onto like some server, and then they get data back. And so like every hour they ground the plane, it's like in the orders of like $1 million, which is the cost to the company or to the airline. And so a lot of these basically airlines have service contracts with the companies and they bear these costs. And so it's like these like multi-million kind of deals, which we're talking about on an annual basis. And rightfully so. Like I think these are really important systems, and we want to make sure that they're maintained well, so that we're all safe and comfortable being able to travel. So the idea I'm trying to like convey here is that there are lots. So this is just one example, but there are many such examples which are critical in terms of their socioeconomic impact, and we can begin to address them with these like miniature robots. So that's the focus. So one of the things what we did as a part of this project is small scale robots. At this when we started out, could not adhere to surfaces or actually move besides like the horizontal plane. So as a part of this work, we developed these electroadhesive mechanisms, which basically, when you apply voltage, you can cling to conductive surfaces. And here you're seeing the robot climb up vertically. And then here you're seeing the same robot go upside down. And so a common theme, what you will see in my work is because we're building small scale systems, we are constrained in some ways because they're small. They have like limited size, weight, power, all of those things. But at the same time, you also have some advantages because they're small. They're really light, which means that things like electroadhesion or like you're still applying high voltage in the order of like 200 volts to a kilovolt to basically get this like 1.5 gram robot to stick to a surface. But if there are these technologies out there which on a larger robot, we could not do that. Like we cannot make a footpad for me to like grab onto a wall or go climbing. That would be like really insane in terms of the voltage we need to apply. So there are tricks we can play exploiting the physics of scaling to do certain things. And so this is, again, so we actually got like a engine block sample where we were able to show things move.
Understand the physics of it. Could you, in 2 sentences, what's the physics of high voltage adhesion?
Yeah, so the idea is so basically you have a dielectric membrane, and so what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a really small capacitor wherever you can. So one surface, which is your environment, is your ground, and then you have an electrode on the other side, which is basically the foot of the robot. And on the bottom side of the foot, which is making contact with the ground, we have like a really thin membrane, a dielectric membrane. In this study, we had about 12 micron thick, but in lab currently, we are working with membranes which are about 3 or 4 microns. And so basically, if you apply voltage across this dielectric film, you have electrostatic forces of attraction, which basically pull you into the surface. And so that's the principle. And so turns out that the electroadhesive force is directly proportional to the square of the voltage, and it's inversely proportional to the square of the thickness of the material. So like it's directly proportional to the electric field square. And so by making those materials thinner, we can get a lot more force out for the same kind of voltage we apply.
Is it affected by water, oil?
So that's just the perfect simplistic model. You have a pristine surface. A lot of the answer, the truthful answer is there's still a lot work which needs to be done to understand that. It seems like in this domain, it's a bit empirical, still a lot of the results in the models. So for example, humidity is a great example. In Colorado, we are great because it's dry. So like we can build up charges easily. We can maintain charges easily. When I was doing these experiments, I was in Boston, and turns out that every day when we did the experiment, like the voltage could fluctuate by like 100 to 200 volts to get the same performance. So ultimately what we ended up building was a humidity chamber so that we could control this. Yes, exactly. So things like humidity, there's some work on temperature, but a lot of the parameters or the factors, such as like even like surface roughness, are very heuristically or empirically determined by just doing experiments, and people are like, oh, it kind of works. Things like oil and all of these things. There are folks working on it for several years. In fact, like one of the early proponents of this technology, Ron Pellerin from SRI, like he's based out of Boulder right now, and so like I've been working with him. He doesn't do this work anymore, but he's like, what's the secret to this? It's like, oh, it just works. Try a few things. And then kind of get it to work. So I think in terms of this, there's a lot of work to be done on the fundamental modeling side and pieces, which we haven't necessarily got into it. We tried collaborating with a few folks at University of Chicago, and we got some early results, but we didn't dive too much into that.
So you play with other things, I mean, the gecko feet.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So great questions. Like, what are other adhesion mechanisms we can potentially use? So we've looked at gecko feet. In fact, my PhD work was with Bob Full, who was one of the pioneers of the people whose lab led the discovery of van der Waals-based gecko adhesion. So we worked a lot with like Mark Rutkowski's lab at Stanford and Ron Fearing's group at Berkeley, who built some of the early gecko adhesives. We've used them, like made little patches and get them to stick. The advantage of them is I think they work really well on inclined surfaces because they're passive structures. But one of the challenges, because they're passive, it's hard to disengage from surfaces, and they also at times require preload to actually get good traction. So you need to push into the surface. So these are shear-based adhesives. The more you slip, the better you actually stick onto a surface. It turns out because of like the grooves and the patterns. And so you need to press into a surface a fair bit. And so when you're like on the floor or like slightly inclined, it's a lot easier. And because our robots are so light, it actually works against us to stick well. But once we stick, it becomes difficult to disengage. And so geckos have evolved these like fascinating mechanisms where they basically curl the tip of their toes to basically initiate a crack at the surface, and the crack propagates. And so I'm encouraging my students to come up with like these like origami mechanisms which we can activate. So I think like Sang-Bae Kim, who's now at MIT, did some like really seminal work in like the late 2000s, showing how you can do this like even for systems at this scale, like a kilogram or two kind of scale systems. But we've played around with that in my lab. I would say, I'm still hopeful that we can get it to work well. But I'm not really going to talk about this, but in my group currently like on electroadhesives, we've been trying to integrate a bit of like active and like passive mechanisms. So we're basically taking these electroadhesives, the classical ones, like the ones I'm talking about, and then like putting a little piece of like PVC gel on them. So this gives you that little bit of compliance. You can texture them in like a gecko kind of fashion if you wanted. But the advantage is it helps with some of those like surface kind of asperities. You can conform to a large number of surfaces. You obviously need a bit more voltage, but there's some work from UCSD like late last year, which show that you can use this idea to grab onto like meshes, for example. So like they're still conductive surfaces, but they don't need to be continuous. They can have a lot of surface asperities and things. So in terms of robustness of the system, I think there's like some really interesting work going on in this field. Any other questions? Okay. So anyways, what I was trying to get at was, small scale robots, hopefully I've convinced you they're great because they can enable us to do a lot of cool applications. Some applications, what we envision doing is like things like disaster response, things like wildfire detection, environment monitoring. Maybe we can do some kind of agricultural applications like pollination, inspection, and we're currently working with the company to potentially have these like crawl on power lines to actually like actively inspect if there are like things which are like off, or like coatings which are chipped off, things like that. So there's a number of like valuable societal needs which we can potentially address with miniature robots, but they need to become much more capable before we're able to realize a lot of these functionalities. So for a second, I want to talk about like that's great. Small scale robots are great, but they're hard to build. So if you think about building traditional systems, this is like the inside of a car or like a bike engine. So you can see that our traditional way of thinking about this is we make components and then you assemble a lot of these components with nuts and bolts. This works, and like here you can see a pretty complex machine with like hundreds of parts, which we've gotten really good at with like these like automation kind of processes. But as we start shrinking these things down, this assembly part gets really, really challenging, and that's one of the big reasons why like people are struggling in the space. And so in order to like think about those practices, we look at inspiration from animals. And so if you look at things like a cockroach here, like, and you look at the exoskeleton does a lot of these like different functions. And in fact, it's a single structure. And if you think about like how biological structures are built, like we're not like taking like a motor or a tube or like a vent pipe and like trying to like glue them together. Like, so biological systems organically grow from a cellular structure and then expand, and then like potentially they differentiate to have like specialized functions, but at the same time, it's a more of like a monolithic kind of like a fabrication process. We can't quite get there. There's some 3D printing practices and other folks who are trying to like come up with additive fabrication approaches which will exploit this. But there's some challenges. So I think, but at the essence of like, if you look at insect exoskeletons, what they're actually composed of in most cases, you have some rigid structures like plates and tubes, which are interconnected by compliant membranes, which allow you to like flex, bend, twist, things like that. So in essence, like you can break down an exoskeleton into the simple combination. And we did some work trying to look at what that is. Like there's a CT scan on the left, and like here I actually dissected the animal, and you can show that yes, it is indeed like plates and tubes, and you can see lots and lots of these like apodemes, like sort of like tendons, muscles, which are connecting these different plates and tubes, and that gets complicated. But in essence, they're plates and tubes which connect. And so the reason I'm talking about this is if we think about exoskeletons as being built this way, then we can potentially kind of come up with a fabrication process which exploits that. So if you're trying to build a robot in a similar way, you can think about like maybe using cardboard for the structure and laminate a piece of plastic on the underside, like make some cuts, and essentially you have a system which has like rigid and flexible elements. And then if you pattern interesting geometries into them, you can get them to like fold and bend. And this is what many of us do have done as like kids, like trying to build like origami toys and things like that. And my collaborators, Ron Fearing's lab, came with this technique called smart composite microstructure, which essentially takes this process and enables you to actually build a full functional robot. So you start with an origami design drawing. Wherever you need to make flexures, you go in with a laser and cut out those little pieces. And then you sandwich a rigid layer, flexible layer, and a rigid layer together, apply heat and pressure, basically laminating things, and then you cut out individual parts, so you get things on the left, and then you can fold them out to create like simple like four-bar mechanisms or like bodies, legs, all of these features, and then assemble them into a final robot. Like basically you add things like your motor sensors, controllers after the fact. So that's the entire process. And once you get good at this, I think we can go from design to prototype really fast. So like for some of the designs, what we have, like I think by the time I finished my PhD, we could go from design to prototyping in like under an hour. So that's the advantage of this technique, where we can rapidly iterate through different designs. And my colleague, Paul Burkmeyer, built this robot called Dash. And so it's a 10 centimeter hexapedal robot. And you can see it's like pretty lightweight. Yeah. And it's modeled after thinking about the cockroach. So they optimized for speed. The reason I'm playing this video is to actually walk through the different fabrication steps. So for folks who have not seen this, this is helpful. So you have basically cardboard, plastic, and cardboard, and you have a little hinge which allows you to bend it. Your structures, like we use like traditional laser cutters to basically pattern those like things. And here you're doing the outline cut. You have a bunch of these, and then you basically hand fold them. So you can see like it takes about like half an hour to like fully assemble the body. Like once you add your legs, and use a lot of glue. And so I think this was really fun for me, and also enjoyable to like use my hands and like make things, glue, get things. And so we're still using some 3D printed components, sometimes like for the gears and actuation mechanisms. We buy off-the-shelf motors, we buy off-the-shelf controllers, but for the most part, like the body is inspired by like the exoskeletal design of insects, and you can drive them. These robots can go really fast. And you can have like different like feed mechanisms if you want to get them to run on different surfaces. Like here you see them. They can be tethered or untethered, so they can carry their own weight and little batteries to power them. The nice thing is, much like a cockroach, you don't really need too many, because if you tune the mechanics correctly, then you can bump into lots and lots of obstacles and not get hurt. And we've done some work on that. Again, I'm not going to get into details of this, but so that's one of the advantages. Like, you can have a secondary motor and get things to turn left and right. And my favorite part is like insects, because these are like pretty compliant structures, they can take a lot of like loading. So they can collide into objects, they can drop, and so they can like passively absorb a lot of forces here. In this experiment my colleagues did, that's yeah, so like this is fine. Like stepping is maybe not doesn't quite as well, but you can drop it off like the floor, like this 7-story building, and
Wow.
It's terminal velocity, right?
yeah,
That makes sense.
and then it runs it out. So you can build these things, and so one of the teams in my lab is trying to understand like why are biological systems robust, and that's because they have these like tuned mechanical properties, and if you exploit them and build them right, we can get robust to do the same thing. And again, this is like one of those advantages. You and me can't jump off a 7-floor building and not expect to get hurt, but like small things can. Oh, no. Yes. And so again, like I showed you this, like this is really cool. You can use the same technique to build even smaller systems. But and this is Rob Wood's lab at Harvard, where I was a postdoc. The thing though is, if you try to like use the same process, like what I told you, like we're making custom actuators, these are piezoelectrics, but it gets harder. Like this is still going from like a 10-centimeter scale to 1-centimeter scale. You have the same number of parts. Actually, these are like fewer parts, but the amount of precision, and this is all done under the microscope, you can see. This is actually Rob doing it when he first started the group. So it takes, so again, so this is not ideal. And so like as you start shrinking and shrinking, in principle, you can go infinitely small, but you need really talented graduate students to spend a lot of time under the microscope. Anyways, so that's still like how you're building it. A little wing. And that's an entire robot. So as you can see, like this can work, but if you want to like build swarms of these and like have them running around, yeah, you need to pay people a lot of money. So anyways, like work, but there is a solution out here, and so this is again, so Rob's lab gave us this technique called printed circuit MEMS fabrication technology, and so the idea is like all we're doing is we're cutting individual structures and folding them, or like precisely angling things. How about we build these into mechanisms? So if you need to like fold something 90 degrees, like why don't you have another fold bar mechanism, and then you turn a crank or a lever, and that like turns like your structure, and so like everything is a jig, and once like you fold it to like different pieces, then you can like go in with the laser, release them, and then you can get these different things. So they actually showed that you can build something like this using pop-up folding techniques. And this is like with like children's pop-up car, like greeting cards. You see these kind of things all the time. Then you can lock things, release them. And then if you have some kind of a gantry, which can like go drop glue, or like a laser, which can go release stuff, like you can actually do this. And then you can get a monolithic structure built this way. And then, yes, it works. So, anyways, so I think there are ways to go smaller. People have been thinking about some ideas, and we can go. And so the steps of this process are like basically similar. You as SEM, you laser machine, but like you have like pin alignments to improve kind of the positioning. You still do the release, but instead of like manually folding by hand, like you leverage some automated like folding or assembly principles. And using this, one of the first robots I designed or like helped build was this like hammer series of robots. So this is a legged robot with 4 legs, and so it uses architecture. Instead of using cardboard, now we're using carbon fiber because like smaller scales, like you have better stiffness weight ratios. We're still using Kapton or something like that. Plastic for these deformations. And as you can see, by trying to build in some of these like pop-up folding mechanisms, the number of layers have started increasing. We just had like a rigid carbon, like we had one laminate, which was like a rigid, soft, rigid layer, but now we have at least 2 laminates, or like actually 2 sublaminates, and each sublaminate has like 2 laminates, so that we can build in some of those like folding mechanisms. So the design gets complicated, but it works. I don't know how to talk about that. Anyway, so using this process, I should already talked about this inverted climbing with hammer. Hammer is also, because of its lightweight, again, like small size-based approach. If you have like heat, it can like coast on the surface of water. And again, like we leverage electricity. So by applying a high voltage on the surface of water, we're able to basically break down surface tension and get the robot to sink. You can see this kind of like go down and then it crawls under the surface, and then it makes its way back up. So you can actually get these like multimodal transitions with these small robots. And again, we're taking advantage of like the small size of these systems because they're so small. They have too much power. So for fun, we showed that you can pop a wheelie. I don't know where it's actually useful, but you can do it. And despite these systems being really small, there is work ongoing to actually make them power autonomous. Like most of the examples I'm going to show you, we're going to use wires because we need like 200 to 250 volts most of the time. But you can make like little packages that are not efficient. They're only like 10% efficient, but we can make them, and then you can get them to run for like a minute or two on a tethered battery if you need it. So I think that's the background. And so what my lab is focusing on is like, okay, I started off in my grad school building palm-sized systems, and I think where we're heading to is like these like penny scale kind of systems. So I think that's one of the big challenges, trying to think about like miniaturization. And because of the this origami-based fabrication technique, so we can actually build systems where, like, if you use like simple physics scaling laws, you can literally take the same design, like shrink it down, and the laser can cut those things as long as it's within the tolerance of the laser, and then you can again like fold and pop up. And this is where like we've miniaturized a lot of things, and we've made things simpler, but it could still get challenging with certain things because there are some parts that are still manual. And so here you can see we're approaching the size of insects. So this robot is in fact smaller than an American cockroach. So this weighs about 330 milligrams, but it has all the same degrees of freedom what I've shown you for the previous system. So the idea is like one of the challenges, like what we've theoretically shown, is that you can make arbitrary small systems using this approach, and then your design complexity doesn't necessarily increase, or your fabrication challenge is also reasonable, and you can get like high performance out of these systems. And where my lab is going with all of this is like we are calling this the autonomic robotic materials fabrication technology, but essentially we want to create something analogous to our skin. So far with everything what I've shown, we're using only passive components. We're using rigid layers and flexible layers, but we want to add more functional elements to it. So for example, we want to add sensory layers, so similar to like a nerves doing signal conduction. We want to add energy absorption layers or like energy harvesting layers. So for example, you can put a layer of solar cell. And because these are laminate process, we can arbitrarily create, as long as you have thin planar structures, you can keep stacking them up, and it shouldn't like affect any of your design essentially. And we're also thinking about like actually embedding electronics in different places so that you can actually do like some smart computation. So this is what I talked about. And the secret sauce to all of this, I think, is this like laser-based fabrication machine, what we have, which we've built up in our group. And the cool thing about the system is it's a femtosecond laser system. So compared to traditional systems, which are like nanosecond or like millisecond or microsecond systems, this is just much, much faster. So essentially what this means is materials, turns out that when you burst pulses of laser, it's really such small or high frequencies or small durations, the process of ablation is not photothermal, so you're not generating heat, but it's rather photochemical. So you're basically cleaving these like chemical bonds between like individual atoms. So essentially all your heat restriction and things like that are limited to like one atomic layer thickness. And the reason, which is why this is interesting or why this is important going forward, is because if you want to cut all kinds of like smart materials like solar cells, things like that, their properties are a strong function of like heat generation. So piezoelectric materials are another example. If you heat them up, then above the Curie temperature, they actually lose their piezoelectric properties. So a lot of these materials have strong coupling with how you process them. Nitinol is another example. Shape memory alloys, great for a lot of things, but you can't actually laser cut them because you have too much heat which you produce, and then that goes beyond your transition zone. So with this technique, we're able to, or with this tool, we're able to cut a lot of these materials. So that's what is enabling us to combine arbitrary heterogeneous materials and stack them up. So we've shown some like simple work, like making electronic layers, like here's a sensor layer. We can also, this is a much larger scale version, but this is, you can actually embed a fluidic layer. So this is like work from Gustav Keplinger's lab, where basically they're building these like Hazel actuators, which are essentially, it's a pouch with electrodes, and then you apply high voltage, your liquid flows back and forth, which causes like the change of like the shape of the pouch. And then if you actually embed that into some kind of structure, like you can get like little leg kind of things which like move, you can get little systems to jump. So this is like obviously like a larger scale version of this. And currently one of my students, Heiko, is actually making a miniature version of this, which we can use to control shape. So I will move on from that. And so the idea where we're going with all of this is with this like origami-based like and design fabrication approach, we think we can actually realize what are autonomic materials or robotic materials. So this is actually coined in this like seminal paper from 10 years ago, which Nicholas Carell, some of you might know, was a part of this paper. And basically, his paper talked about a robotic material is a material which can sense, actuate, compute, and communicate. So if you have all of these functions, that's what like our skin or like sophisticated structures are. If you can do that, then you can pretty much do a lot of the robot actions. And so, but this has been speculated or like hypothesized that we should do this 10 years ago, but nobody's actually built it because it's hard to do that. And like, there are folks working on the 3D printing space for like embedding electronics and like having fluidic channels, things like that. Our answer to that is we can do that with these like 2D laminate-based approaches as well. And so our lab is trying to kind of try to realize that with these techniques. So that's kind of where we're going in the next few years. So hopefully the next time I'm here, I'll share more updates as to where we are. But getting back to the science part of what I was sharing, so I said we want to build agile and adaptable robots. And why do you want to think about that? Because if you're trying to navigate in confined spaces or like hard to get places where these robots might be helpful. You don't actually know like where you're going, and so you might need to change your shape or like conform to your environmental constraints. And for practical applications, if you're just slow, that's not helpful. You need to be actually moving with some kind of like performance, like so speed, ability to turn, things like that. So that's where like agility and adaptability. And as I'm going to talk about, these things don't always go hand in hand. And so that's basically one of the big themes in my lab, which we're trying to address in the last couple of years. And I'm going to show some early work, how we're thinking about that, and how we can potentially overcome these design trade-offs between agility and adaptability of the system. So typical robotic systems trade-off agility with adaptability. And so like I have those two axes. Like, so if you're adaptable, then like that means that you have like basically lots of degrees of freedom. And if you're agile, it means that you're able to move fast in certain directions or apply forces. And so typically when you think about adaptable systems, we think of like on the biological scale, we think of worms, we think of the octopus, we think of soft robots. And if you think of really agile systems, we think of these like the Boston Dynamics dogs or these kind of like robots or serial link manipulators, which have like high power motors, but like lots of closed loop feedback to be able to do that. So I think if you just like portray this kind of like scale, so you have these like all of these like soft systems on one end, and on the opposite end, you have agile systems. But what I'm hypothesizing is that if we're able to shapeshift or like change the morphology of your system, or if you're a system, then you can potentially overcome this like seeming this like disparity between like soft robots and like more traditional classical rigid robots. So if you think about animals, they're not really like soft or rigid in the classical way we think about robotic systems. Like all animals are like hybrid, right? They're like soft and rigid. Even though we cannot squeeze into gaps as small as some things I'm going to show you, we can still like go bouldering or like do things where we're like crawling under things. So we are able to do that. And so we think that this is actually a principle which a lot of biological systems use. And in order to like understand this, we use this interdisciplinary scientific approach where we typically start with locomotion biomechanics. We're interested in shapeshifting. So we ask the questions like, oh, are there any animals we can look at who are expert shapeshifters? And then my solution, as you might expect, is a cockroach. So I think they're like masters of like crawling through spaces where you don't want them to be. So it's like, okay, let's try to understand how they do that. So we start with the locomotion biomechanics. So we do a lot of experiments, collect data. The idea is we form hypotheses to understand like what might be happening. So we basically challenged cockroaches to run through small gaps. So here's a cockroach which is about 15 millimeters tall, and I asked them to walk through gaps which are 4 millimeters, and turns out that they can. So first I'm going to show you a video which is unconfined, real time, and slowed down 20 times. That's what a normal cockroach is doing. Here you see go through a gap of 12 millimeters. So basically you could see the cockroach like bump its head like a couple of times. So the reason I'm showing this video is like I want to convince you that the cockroach actually, when it's like standing, it's like pretty tall. It's like 15 millimeters. And so the smallest gaps we were able to convince them was 4 millimeters. And so this is what they're doing, and they're able to like move really fast. And so what is impressive is when they're squished to about 4 millimeters, they can still move at about 5 polygons a second. Again, to put that in perspective, that's what Usain Bolt ran like his 100-meter dash at. So they're able to do this while being like squished by more than like 60% or so. And so that's really impressive. wouldn't be nice to have robots which could do that? And so being a mechanical engineering by training, I was curious and I was like, oh, let me put this in what kind of forces do they experience? And so I'm going to tell you, like, no animals were harmed in the study. We tested that. We actually ran all of these animals before and after. They could run, fly, walk, all of those things they do. And so you'll see. But anyways, so when you squish them, turns out that despite when I say exoskeleton, there you go, it's waking up. Yeah. Anyways, so when you think about exoskeletons, like people always have like an impression that an exoskeleton is tough, rigid, protective. But anybody who's played with bugs know that it's like really squishy and like and so to convince ourselves, like we did this experiment and turns out that they actually are. So if the exoskeleton actually behaves like an ideal viscoelastic material, so like basically the forces it experiences is proportional to the amount of compression, but also the rate of compression. So the faster you squish, the more forces you're able to. At the gaps, what we were actually able to run them successfully, turns out that they can withstand over 800 times the body weight, which is impressive. And so now remember, Usain Bolt 800 times and running at the 100-meter dash speed. So that's what cockroaches are doing. Okay, so that's great. So we did a lot of these experiments, like I changed the friction, and we want to really understand like what's the mechanics. And what's really interesting is when you think about like a locomotion, we only care about like the forces you produce. You don't think about your environment as much. Like when you're moving through fluid, like flying or in water, you always think about drag and thrust. Turns out that this kind of confined space locomotion is analogous to that because you're like dragging your belly and your body and your back against the surface, but you're also using your legs to produce thrust. So we did a bunch of we built simple models where we and we made predictions. So one prediction we made was like if we keep the ground or like let's say if we keep the top friction constant, then if we change the friction on the bottom surface, like what happens. And so in one extreme case, if your bottom surface, like your ground is really slippery, then you can't exert any forces, you're slipping all over the ground, so you're going to be really slow. So that's your like left end of the spectrum. And the opposite end is like when you have a lot of friction, you can apply a lot of forces, but your belly is also dragging, so you're going to be slow. Somewhere in the middle is a happy medium, and that's what our model said. When we went and did that experiment, turns out that is kind of like what we get. And so we have like a simple physics-based model which can predict parameters for a robot, what we care about. So like things like velocity, stride length, but also explaining some of the observations we had on the biological side. So we have like physics-based principles. And so this helped us choose like certain parameters, some design parameters. And I already talked to you about the fabrication process, and using this fabrication process, we built this robot called CRAM, or compressible robot with articulated mechanisms. So this robot can squish itself by 50%, not as good as a cockroach, but still moves reasonably fast. And so we were able to show adaptive locomotion where we were leveraging these soft compliant exoskeletons in order to be able to make this behavior. So effectively, this is, you can think of this as like passive shape morphing, where you're adapting to your constraints, and by choosing certain design constraints, you can minimize how much you're able to trade off.
But this roll up into a loop ball.
No, that is actually one of the students in my class, or like I teach Bioinspired robotics every fall, and so one of the students' groups did that as a class project. It couldn't run very well, but it can roll up into a ball. It was too heavy. So yeah, so I'm going to continue on thinking about this, and maybe you can stop me at any point. But what I wanted highlight are two aspects. So like I showed you, like passive shape morphing is great. Like you can actually enable capabilities, but how do you get better at those capabilities? And so so one is like the physical embodiment, and then you have like sensory motor coordination and actions. I don't think I'll have time to get into that today, but like I'll talk about the first part where like we looked at the cockroach, so that was great. We were able to get vertically confined locomotion for the first time. And then we were looking around when I started my lab here. Basically, every legged robot you see has this rectangular body, and this across scales from like a millimeter scale all the way to meter scales. There's a very good reason why we have that. I think like for practical assembly, fabrication kind of things, it's easy to pack motors and batteries, all of that. So build in boxes, you can swap out the legs. But if you think about like being able to be agile and cluttered complex spaces, that's not great. You're going to get stuck. So what our lab did is we had this like idea of like confined space locomotion from cockroaches vertically. Can we take the same idea and then like laterally squish your body? And you can go through these cluttered gaps. And so this is Heiko, my first student. He built CLARI, or the compliant legged agile robotic insect. And so the idea for CLARI is that you can passively shape morph to enhance your adaptability to these like confined cluttered spaces. In order to be able to do that, we had to go a little bit away from like some of the monolithic fabrication technique I talked about because it was just too hard. But we're still keeping some of these, but we're breaking the design into modular aspects. So like we, instead of building the whole body together at once, we build a whole leg into once. We still use the same kind of pop-up ideas, but we build legs monolithically and use them as modules. So you can build a 4-legged, 6-legged robot, but also if something gets hurt or one of the legs stops functioning, we can easily swap them out, or you can come up with ways to like do that. So, so in terms of leg design, this is similar to like the Hammer series of robots. You have spherical 5-bar transmission. For each leg, so each leg is able to basically lift upwards or like swing back and forth, and these are controlled by individual actuators. And we use a planar fabrication process. So like here's like showing the pop-up process with the whole thing. Like once you cut it, it folds out, and then you stick your actuators in, and you're able to get that. And so we use the same fabrication process, but now we have 3 layers: an active layer, a passive layer, and some circuitry layer because we're using copper kapton to drive them. And so here's like the piezoelectric actuator. Here's like the leg working. We built this robot and so it's a quadrupedal robot, 2 degrees of freedom. It can run at different frequencies, run a bunch of different gaits. Here's robot like walking forward and then walking backward. But the interesting thing about the robot is like we were trying to like basically analyze the trade-offs in terms of performance, right? So we basically asked the question, how does the performance change as the robot is in different body shapes? And so we basically fixed the robot body into a long configuration, a symmetric square configuration, or a wide configuration, ran the robot with a bunch of different gaits, and surprisingly, you see that there is the robot performance is functional shape. So if you're tall and narrow, you're able to move really fast forward. But if you're symmetric, you're able to go forward, but you're also able to go left to right equally well. But like when you're going forward, you're not as fast as the tall and narrow configuration. And the short and wide configuration, you're really slow going forward. You're great at going laterally. And so hopefully this is getting you to hint that if you think about agility, by changing your shape, going from your one configuration or the configuration, depending on like how fast you want to move in a particular direction, you can potentially change your body shape around to be able to do that. So this is some data, like skip this. Actually, the other part I didn't tell you is like when we let the body free, turns out that it was really hard to control the body. Like basically, turns out there's a really tricky problem which animals work on this all the time. So like I think this is where when people say like you need a strong core, this is the reason. So if you need to move forward, like you need to actually tune the mechanics of your body and stiffen up. Otherwise, like all of your energy is just going into basically changing your body and not actually making you move. So we addressed some of those things, like we built a smaller robot because we could, but we also tuned some of the properties of the segments interlinking, and this made it better, but it has all the same features. And so what we were able to show for the first time is like you're able to laterally squeeze through gaps. So here's a robot where it's going through a lateral gap, and you can see your robot shape is passively deforming and it's able to come out. What's more is we exploit this to show omnidirectionality in the system. So you're able to squish in one way, go all the way to one end, expand in the other direction, and then move out. You could ask me, why not just build a skinny robot to begin with? You could, but once you come to the end, you still need to turn, and then you'll get stuck unless you're able to like make the shape conformation change. It's not, you need to have some kind of compliance and shape changing ability. And so so we showed this, and so this is just so where we're getting at is like I'm hinting at how we can basically break these like trade-offs between adaptability and agility. Obviously, this is still passive, but if you're able to actively do this, we can do a bit more. And so that's some work in progress. And I think what I want to say in the next few minutes is just like this approach is like other people are thinking about it as well. So like although we've shown some legged robots, you can do this for other kinds of wheeled robots. There's also some flying robots where like you're exploiting the same kind of ideas, but you have some kind of trade-offs as well. To actually get mechanically better, we're looking at instead of like having simple 1 degree of freedom joints, we're trying to like make 3D joints. And so I told you that we can cut nitinol with a laser. And so with that, we're building like simple like flexures. Like, so here we're making living hinges, which is 1 degree of freedom, but we can ideally want to make like 3 degree of freedom living hinges. This was the fabrication process I already talked about. And here's just showing you proof that you can cut it with things with our laser and the material properties don't really change compared to other systems. And we actually modeled this and like tested it. So like our experimental data matches very well with like the theoretical stuff. And so that's the next step in terms of like, can we build more complex joints? They're still passive, but nitinol, because shape memory alloy, at least you can apply voltage or heat and get these like conformation change. So at least you can go between like two states. So that's some work what we're thinking about. And we're also like my lab also big part of my lab also does biology work or bioinspiration to think about how animals do things. And so we have spiders in our lab that we're basically putting them in different squishy constraints. So you're restricting their like movement. So this is not similar to a cockroach where like the body was getting squished, but here they're fairly small bodies but large legs. So their legs are being confined. So they have to like move them around. And obviously, if you move your legs around in different ways, we know that you're not going to be able to move the same way or like to move the same speed when you're taking short steps versus long steps. But turns out that even if we go up to like 40% kind of conformation change, they're able to move or run at about the same speed. So we're investigating what kind of kinematic changes are they using? Like, are they changing their control or like timing, things like that? But we're seeing some early insights. You can see like the nominal configurations where the legs are being placed. Like when you're unsquished, they're like basically like a circle uniformly placed. And then obviously as you're like laterally constraining them, the legs are moving inwards, but they're also like moving forwards. And and so there are like some interesting changes what we're observing. So lots of work in progress. And so by learning from these things, we're hoping that we can get some concrete ideas and actually transfer them into like the design of our robots, and to realize these like adaptability and agility in a single platform. And it remains to be seen, but hopefully we think that we want them to leave lab environments soon. And this is our some of the members of the lab's an old picture, but we funding sources and things like that. And I can happy to answer any questions. We're working on that. So we have some work where we're putting like batteries and things, but like sensing is obviously one of the things what we cannot do. Here, we're embedding tiny capacitors in the joints of the legs, so we can get, for example, this is a large scale version. And some like as the things are being bent, like you can actually get those things done. So this is what it takes to build those like tiny capacitors and some early data. So yeah, here you can see like as the leg is moving, you're able to like actually track like the leg movement. So we're starting with like simple joint sensing and strain sensing. So we think about like that's the first place to start getting some sensitive feedback, and then we can have microcontrollers on board, which will use that information to like make adjustments to your gates or things like that. But it's a work in progress and it'll take a long time. But we are collaborating with lots of folks, both on the biology side, some folks on the AI side, trying to bring intelligence to these small scale systems. But one of the big challenges there is we're constrained by how much compute power we have. So we need to play some games and tricks to be able to adapt some of the larger scale solutions into our system.
Around that.
We can, I think, up to a point. So like at some point, I think we're going to like again be limited by like the communication speed between like your host and your system, and also like communicating. So like Wi-Fi is already a bit costly for this robot. So to run around, these robots consume about 25 to 100 milliwatts of power. And so that's starting to get like I think Bluetooth would be great, but they require there's small spaces. There might be restrictions in terms of like other kind of things. So yes, I think doing this kind of like swarm or collective thing or communicating with the central hub, that's definitely one of the directions we can leverage, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to think of these like marsupial kind of systems where there's a larger robot which carries like 5 or 10 of these like smaller robots. They give you commands and they do all of these things, and then like you have like a mama robot and a bunch of like tiny baby robots running around. So that's one of the ideas like which we're trying with. Like we have some collaborative work with Purdue going on, trying to think about thing.
I'm wondering, it's a little bit question from a different side, because you're trying to replicate insects. But I understand that at the end you want to have some sensors on them and they will do some job. How that work that just put the sensors on the insects?
Yeah, so great question. So I would say we're not trying to replicate insects. I want to clarify that we are trying to understand the principles of biological systems and actually build them into robotic systems when they're useful by combining it with the best engineering practices. But in terms of like your question, yes, there are lots of people trying to reverse engineer insects or combine things. So I think there's a whole field of biohybrid robots. So that's where you're using insect components. But I think this was really popular about 20 years ago, called cyborg, robotic cyborgs or cyborg insects, where you can hack certain pathways. So I think there's even a company which sells backyard brains. I think that's so you can get a Madagascar hissing cockroach with a little wireless board, which basically zaps, I think their antennal nerve, no, their optic nerve, I think. And so like you can send little circuits and then you can get them to go forward, turn left, turn right, basically like an RC car. So you can do that. And there's some challenges with this work. Well, besides like the ethical constraints and things, but in terms of science too. So it turns out that like DARPA had a big project in 2005, which they ended abruptly because it works under certain limited constraints or conditions. So for example, in the lab, things work really well. But when you take it outside, like the animal is able to handle, but it also starts thinking. And so, for example, you can imagine if it sees a predator or if it sees a mate, then no matter how many times you zap it, it's going to do what it wants or like find ways to override it. And so what happened was they were using bees and like these large beetles, and they animals would rather die by getting like, because the way to get this to work is like you're applying electrical impulses. We get used to that. The threshold keeps increasing, and you can keep increasing the voltage higher and higher, and at some point you just burn them rather than. But there are ways to make it work, and so that's what I talked about, the hybrid systems. Like we have folks here, Nicole Shu, one of my colleagues, she's one of the experts who's thinking about jellyfish robots, where they remove the brain of the jellyfish, and then you put your own like little microcontroller brain, but you keep your muscles and the rest of the things intact. So you can still use the body of the system to do some of those things. Yeah, so there's this fascinating work. Ultimately, I think all of these things will probably merge into some kind of, even us, like probably we carry cell phones with us all the time. It's probably only a matter of time where it gets like glued to your brain or something, where you get phone calls, and I don't know. I think that's where I see like some technology heading, but we're all probably going to be some kind of hybrid electromechanical systems at some point. So yes, it's possible to do that. There's lots of work, mostly with invertebrates. It's a lot easier. Vertebrates, it's very challenging just because you have like many ways to overcome and trick and bypass things. So
There's also accessible working biotic games for Finnish crickets and fiddles. Just playing with them. I have a question, but I don't know if you still have time.
I mean, I have time. So
the work is very complex and it mixes a lot of different things. How do you know when you look to things that already exist, or when you build your electronics from scratch, your hinges from scratch, your materials from scratch? How do you know when you borrow and when you start inventing?
yeah, so I think it's a great question. So like we're working in robotics, which is a fundamentally interdisciplinary thing, and so a lot of this work comes from collaborations or collaborative work. I think that's the easiest path to do this. And so wherever possible, we try to leverage. So like I didn't talk about, so most of the work what I showed you is like everything, building things in the lab. But we're working with like I think like some groups from Penn State and University of Washington to look at flies and locomotion. We're not doing flying, but we're working with them to do that. So I think in terms of the expertise, like what I've personally, like my background is like I started off as a mechanical engineer. I was fascinated by like animals and bugs, and so I wanted to do robotics, but I didn't like coding, so like I absolutely hate that. So like no computer science for me. So I wanted to do something hands-on, and like when I was looking around for PhDs, like the cool thing to do was computer vision, and so everybody was doing that piece, and so I didn't want to do that, and so like I found a biology lab which was doing like bioinspired robotics. So I was like, oh, I can do like more mechanical things, so like hands-on. So I ended up joining this group, and turns out that it was actually, they were barely doing robotics, but most of the group was actually an animal physiology lab. So I spent 6 years learning biology, and so I did a lot of biomechanics, and then I went back, and for my postdoc, I mostly worked in material science, like and thinking about like different materials and like how do you make thin films, and so I personally ended up like collecting different like domain knowledge like sequentially, and so that's potentially one way. In my lab, how we're doing this is we're building teams. So I have two math, or like among my PhD students, two people doing math or coming from controls background, one electrical engineer, two mechanical engineers, and so I'm trying to basically bring in different like interest and expertise in the lab and just grow. So I don't have a great answer to how I'm like why I'm doing the things I'm doing, but we try to do we always try to reach out to experts first, like when we can, and when they're like accessible, and otherwise we try to bring in those expertise in the form of postdocs and students, and maybe like start developing that expertise in the lab. So that's kind of like how we've going about.